Modern Jamaican history does not begin with Bob Marley and reggae music. It begins with a group of black workers in a cane field fighting for justice. In one way or another, Jamaicans have been fighting ever since. First they fought colonial masters.
You got a sense of an awakening, the growth of a sense of rejection and rebellion. Babylon must fall.
And won their independence.
We are our own people. We have our own direction. Our movement forward now.
Then they dared to take on the might of America.
Kissinger doesn't stick his finger in Manley's face, he box his finger out of your face.
As long as this party is in power, we intend to walk through the world on our feet and not on our knees.
It's a journey to nationhood.
Jamaicans are people who want their freedom, and they want to retain their freedom, and they will die fighting for their freedom.
Jamaica lies almost at the center of the Caribbean Sea. It was home to Arawak Indians until Christopher Columbus stumbled across it in 1494, declaring it the fairest island eyes have beheld, mountains and the land seem to touch the sky.
Physically, it's by far the most beautiful island in the Caribbean. We have mountains 7,300 feet higher than any mountain in the United Kingdom. We're laced with wonderful rivers. There are so many different parts of Jamaica. There are parts of Jamaica that are African. Most of it is very English. The parish of St. Anne's, you think you're driving through Sussex.
The Indians were almost extinct by the time slavery took hold. Spanish colonizers began to import labor from Africa. Jamaica was the dropping-off point and auctioning center for slaves. Those sold to sugar plantations here faced a harsh, cruel life and an early death. Only the most resilient would survive, and the more rebellious took to the island's mountains and fought a war of sabotage and uprisings, first against the Spanish, then against the British when they took charge in 1655. Rebellion has shaped Jamaica's history. In 1865, Paul Bogle, a preacher, led a peaceful protest at Morant Bay. When the crowd were fired upon, they fought back. Bogle declared that the Black Skin War was at hand. It was a war against white oppression, and one that this brave peasant army could never hope to win. Naturally, when the rebellion was quelled, white revenge was swift and sadistic. Paul Bogle was hanged. 430 of his followers were executed. The British government, appalled at the ferocity of the violence, decided that the island should be ruled directly from Britain.
The closest modern comparison to this would have been apartheid, in which you have a democracy for whites and a dictatorship for blacks. And what it meant is that the many rebellions which took place against slavery were brutally put down. But this did not stop the fact that Jamaica remained, for historical reasons, one of the most rebellious of the British possessions.
By the 1920s, slave ships had been replaced by steamships. Wealthy Europeans and Americans came in search of paradise and friendly natives. Despite the end of slavery, most blacks continued to work in cane fields from dusk until dawn and were paid a pittance. In 1938, with the world on the brink of war, the west of the island became a battlefield. Canefield workers in Frome decided to down tools over poor working conditions and wages. They started a rebellion amongst the masses, weary of still being treated like slaves. They burned crops, destroyed houses and fields, then turned on the landowners. In the heat of the conflict, many were shot by the police, while others were thrown into jail.
Those disorders was a turning point in Jamaica's modern history. A new agenda was set for the future, in which the people and their views and their aspirations would be taken into consideration.
Devon House, built in 1881, is a testament to Georgian England, bang in the middle of bustling modern Kingston. In Jamaica's political awakening, two leaders emerged from the island's brown classes. They were cousins and as diametrically opposed as two men could be. There was Norman Manley, the introverted Rhodes Scholar, a bookish barrister with a passion for classical music. Opposing him was the extrovert Bustamante, a one-time moneylender with the flamboyance, charm and wit that made him a natural man of the people. These two men would come to dominate the country's political future. But what they both wanted more than anything was to lead an independent Jamaica. In colonial Jamaica, shade or pigment mattered. Both men came from the mixed-race upper classes. They had little in common with the underclass they sought to represent. But in the Caribbean, the black masses had been taught to believe that only light-skinned leaders could be taken seriously. The cricket test proved it. In 1938, the West Indies cricket team was predominantly white and mixed race.
You've had a situation in Jamaica for generations where there was a color class hierarchy, no question at all. At the top, white people, white expatriates, white locals, and then mixed peoples who were closer in the spectrum of color to being white, going down the scale to people who are black.
On behalf of Her Majesty, His Excellency invested those who, by their service to the island, have nobly deserved the recognition and thanks of their Queen.
There's what I call the gratefulness factor, in that most people who were of Bustamante's complexion it had nothing to do with the majority of black people. So for somebody like him to actually stand for them made him far more important to them, because they were grateful to him for having broken to some degree with his typical social background.
Frome was the beginning of one of many worker rebellions sweeping the whole of the Caribbean region. As a lawyer, Norman Manley realized he had a vital role to play.
I well remember the day they started. Within 2 hours, every single group of workers in the principal city, Kingston, were out on strike. And I wondered what was going to happen. And that night I made up my mind. And I put an advertisement in the leading newspaper of Jamaica that I would represent all the striking groups in the country. And I got up next morning and life began on a new plane.
Norman Manley, NW to his friends, was an idealist. He had a real love for the land of Jamaica and its people. But unlike his cousin known as Buster, he would always find it difficult to connect with them.
Buster had a very easy rapport with people. I mean, he could just get up there and say a couple of things they loved to hear. They liked the little bit of the devil in him, whereas NW was much harder to swallow, for the Jamaican people to swallow. I always had the feeling that in a way he kind of set the bar so high, sometimes he exhausted them.
Alexander Bustamante really didn't come into prominence until there was a historic march by workers. That march happened to be in an area in which he was, and he jumped into the march and moved to the head of it and gave the march leadership. The police commanded the marchers to cease, to stop, and they leveled their guns at the marchers. And Bustamante bared his shirt and bared his chest and said to them, "Shoot me and leave the people alone."
A report by the British government following the uprising at Frome was damning. It blamed a colour caste system for black unemployment and urban squalor. Norman vowed to sweep this inequality aside when he set up the People's National Party in 1938. Buster's vision was different. He formed a trade union in his own name, out of which grew the Jamaica Labour Party.
I think he saw that Manley was a potential rival for his leadership, somebody coming from a different sector of the society. The intellectual, the successful barrister, the person who was seen as the purveyor of ideas.
Over the next 20 years, Norman Washington Manley became the man with the plan. He'd already won the right to vote for the island's masses, and he had taken Jamaica into the West Indies Federation with the aim of forming one government for all the islands and cutting ties with Britain altogether.
If the islands got together to form a larger unit, we might get self-government better if we federated. And then there was also the aspect that if we could federate and work out an economic plan for the region, then industries could come into existence which catered not just to an insular, small insular market, but to a wider market.
Buster went along with federation at first, but no one could read the mood of the people like he could. He decided to hedge his bets.
I never know what I'm going to do from one moment to the other.
Buster knew Jamaican people had a big island mentality and wouldn't be told what to do by smaller Caribbean islands.
One of the reasons why I'm chief against federation too is this custom union, which, if it materializes, will destroy the economy of Jamaica.
We felt we could do it, we could go it alone, so that eventually it arose that a referendum was held, called by Norman Manley, to take a decision, and it was the JLP that fought for Jamaica to go it alone as an independent country, while the PNP fought to retain our position in the federation.
When the question of continuing the federation was put to the people in 1961, they voted no. It was a crushing disappointment to Manley, who felt a historic opportunity had been lost.
St. Mary East, 74 of 90 boxes counted.
As the election results came in those days, they would come in on the rediffusion radio. And my grandfather was sitting at the head of the dining room table, and in front of him, the federal flag was folded on the table. And I went over and I said, "What's happening, Pa?" Because I sensed that everybody was getting very upset in the house. And he drew me over to him, and he took the flag and unfurled it, and he put it around me. And he pulled me to him, hugging me with the flag. And he said, "Never forget this flag." And he just held me, and he was so sad. I just felt the enormity of that moment.
Come to Jamaica and feel all right. Today, thousands happening. Tourism in Jamaica was thriving. In the 1950s, the island gained a reputation as the place where the rich, famous and the powerful played. As more and more hotels appeared, a new service industry developed in which staff learned to cater for the needs of white tourists.
My cousins and I went into one of these hotels in Montego Bay for service, and we got none. As if we were not there. The people who were serving, blacker than we were, simply ignored us. And my cousins and I created a very considerable scene. I recall us turning over the tables and demanding service, which tells us two things. One, about the extent of prejudice in Jamaica at the time of independence, and two, the extent to which even middle-class Jamaicans were not prepared to put up with it.
The eyes of the world were on the Honourable Norman Manley, Premier of Jamaica, as he prepared to leave his homeland for the most momentous of all conferences.
By 1962, the only option was to go it alone. The momentum for independence was now unstoppable. Manley knew that without it, the country would be forever tied to its colonial past, something a privileged few had grown comfortable with.
You had a kind of unease among people, particularly middle-class people or people who are moneyed or landed or whatever, with the idea of the mass having a universal vote which could upset a lot of things, and to lose the comfort of the British protection. And what I think happened is that gradually people began to recognize, well, wait a minute, we're people too, we're a society. Why can't we run our own affairs?
Never have Jamaicans been so gay, cleaning up, painting up for Independence Day. Ask anyone from tots to grandpops, they all say, clean up, paint up for Independence Day.
On the morning of August 3rd, at the Palisadoes International Airport, the moment approaches for the arrival of Her Royal Highness Princess Margaret.
Britain had already begun to let go of its many colonies around the world. It was time for the mother country to cut Jamaica loose. This time there was no bloody rebellion. On August the 6th, 1962, with the simple flourish of a royal signature, it was done. Jamaica was independent.
I remember being very emotional. In fact, I'm still emotional, if you forgive me. And saying, well, we are our own people. We have our own direction. Tremendous hope, our movement forward now.
From the airport, the Princess drives through the gaily decorated streets of Kingston, where thousands of spectators line the route to witness the first major event of the 8 days of celebrations.
I remember my first outfit was this black dress with green and gold piping all over it. And so I was in the Jamaican colors and feeling so great. It was a wonderful feeling.
Princess Margaret is met by the Prime Minister, Sir Alexander Bustamante, who introduces the Minister of Education, the Honourable Edwin Allen, and the Honourable Edward Seaga, Minister of Development and Welfare.
For Norman Manley, who'd been the orchestrator of independence, the moment was tinged with sadness. Only weeks before, Buster had been elected the first Prime Minister of free Jamaica.
There was a great personal sadness in the family. My grandfather had been beaten. Myself and my grandmother were just so broken up for him that we were going to see someone else lead our independence. It was so unbelievable that the sculptor who had brought the independence up out of the wood wasn't having his name on the bottom of the carving. It was heartbreaking for us.
Present!
Yellow for natural riches, black for the struggle, and green for hope. What would it be like to go it alone? To really be a big island? Vestiges of the past are everywhere here, but 1962 promised a new dawn. In those early years, it delivered both a cultural awakening and an economic boom, driven mostly by the discovery of bauxite. It was essential for the making of aluminium, and Jamaica had more of it than anyone else.
Jamaica in those days was referred to as the Jamaican miracle. You couldn't help but feel the great excitement of the period. And as I said, with an average growth rate of over 6% per annum, we were then the fastest growing country in the developing world.
Jamaica was on a roll. It was finding its place in the world. Martin Luther King came to address students at the University of the West Indies. But for all the outward confidence, there was discontent amongst the poor in downtown Kingston. They called themselves the sufferers. On the 100th anniversary of the Paul Bogle uprising, they looked to a new breed of politician for deliverance. He was Edward Seaga, a slick former music promoter and the JLP's rising star. In 1965, Edward Seaga addressed a crowd of thousands of people here in National Heroes Park, evoking the memory of the rebel Paul Bogle. As he spoke, the crowd heckled him. He responded with what sounded like a declaration of war. If they think that they are bad, I can bring the crowds of West Kingston. We can deal with them in any way, at any time. It will be fire for fire, blood for blood. Buster and Norman Manley watched in horror as the young Seaga signaled the beginning of a new and dangerous political phase. Whereas Bogle had fought on behalf of all Jamaicans, this was to set them at each other's throats.
There was an early period in my life in the mid-late 1960s in which I had a political outburst on the occasion of the unveiling of a monument to one of our national heroes, in which I did make some very intemperate remarks.
But they had the desired effect. Edward Seaga built up a strong power base in downtown Kingston. Here residents were forced to live along a political divide enforced by gangs.
Mother sent him to buy some greens, and when he went waiting for the greens, a lot of JLP supporters came upon him and chopped him up, cut him up. See there? All both away.
Tivoli Gardens became a JLP Seaga stronghold, while Trenchtown was home to PNP supporters. The battle lines were drawn, and some of the bloodiest conflicts would be fought here.
In our yard, we were known as JLP supporters. In those days, they used to fight politics with stones, bottles and stones and sticks. So you would find that at the end of a public meeting, when the People's National Party would end their public meeting and people are going home, and they would pass our place, they would throw stones. My grandmother would say to me, "Go under the bed, Babsy, I don't want anybody to, anything to hit you."
After 30 years, Norman Manley retired from politics. It was the late 60s. Civil rights had taken hold in the States. Young black Jamaicans were no longer grateful to the generation that had won them independence.
The fact that they singled him out to blame for a lot of the things that they felt were going wrong since independence, I think their anger at him and their dismissal of him must have been very painful, though always he would intellectually come to terms with it. Youth does this, they have to rebel against things.
First of all, you got a sense of an awakening. And that showed itself across the board. The growth of a sense of rejection and rebellion. Babylon must fall. Babylon being the society of colonialism, which continued into the late 60s and early 70s.
When you hear that Jamaica, independent Jamaica, has a black prime minister, you say, well, those people are in power. That's black power. But that's baloney. That is hogwash. That's a damn lie.
But Jamaica wasn't ready to elect a black leader. Instead, it turned again to the brown middle classes, to a trade union leader who'd been educated in London. Michael was Norman's second son, but he spoke to a whole new generation.
He was tall and handsome, and the girls at school used to whistle at him and call him sexy, and I loved that.
We didn't need another Norman who didn't have that common touch. But he proved to be something his father never was, somebody who would stir a crowd and pull them along with him by just the sheer magnetism of what he said and how he said it.
Daddy was cut out for it. He had that secret ingredient that Buster had, which I think Daddy used, I suspect, a little more honorably.
Physically very active, and of course, perhaps the most handsome man in the country.
Darling, you're so beautiful.
He was good looking and believed in keeping his body fit. I mean, I always say to people, when I fell in love with his midriff. I'd never seen a midriff so flat.
Michael Manley was born in St. Andrews, Jamaica. He met his first wife while studying at the London School of Economics. They had one daughter, Rachel. Though his first love was journalism, Michael returned home to find his political destiny already laid out for him.
I recall telling him that I didn't think the PNP was radical enough, and he got very angry. Manley was very good at getting angry and losing his temper when he said that if you want to be a Che Guevara, you can go to the hills, but I'm not into that. And I said, well, I don't want to be a Che Guevara and I don't want to go to the hills, but I just think that the People's National Party is too rooted in the middle class to make the kind of changes that I believe necessary to uplift the working class and the disadvantaged.
When Norman Manley died in 1969, Michael became leader of the People's National Party. Jamaica desperately needed new direction. There was high unemployment, poverty, and almost no social welfare. Manley believed he knew what had to be done and how to take the people with him.
There was a thing called the bandwagon, which grabbed artists, popular artists, and went around the country to different locations. There was the whole business of getting away from the ostentation, that the official dress was going to be shirt jacks.
Flamboyant, charismatic, good-looking, eloquent. Michael Manley could convince you that he's the greatest guy in the world, and you'd believe him.
I remember one night during the campaign, the people got so excited about him that they would literally pick him up when he appeared. And I don't know what went wrong this night, but as they maneuvered through the crowd with him up there, he fell, they dropped him. And he cracked a couple of ribs. We had to rush to the hospital, do all of that stuff. And you know, the next day he was out on the campaign trail again.
We've come too far, we're not turning back now. We've come too far, we're not turning back now. We have a pride now, we have a place now, we have a mission now. And I say to you, my friends, together we are going to march forward under God's heaven, building democratic socialism. Glory to socialism!
Michael Manley said, yes, people, better must come. Give me a chance and better must come, better will come. And so they bought it.
Michael Manley swept to power and became the country's 5th Prime Minister. He was following in the footsteps of his father, but had his own vision for the future of Jamaica. His would be a socialist agenda, grounded in a new sense of nation and based on its African heritage and black pride. In the early 1970s, he gave land to the farmers, created jobs for the poorest working class women, and most importantly, provided free education, not just for the privileged, but for every child. Under Manley, Jamaicans would be in charge of their own destiny.
This government had started a program of change, the like of which had never been seen in Jamaica. Young people were getting education at last. For years, women in this country never knew their own children. Because of the long hours, by the time they could get home, the children had to be asleep in bed. And nobody cared. And this government cared because of democratic socialism.
He just bucked the system. He just went in there and picked up Jamaica by the roots and turned it upside down. That's what independence was about. You were a Jamaican. It didn't matter who was married or not married. You were a Jamaican. You were a member of that family. That was who you were. You had rights. I remember a woman saying it. For the first time, I felt like I was walking in my own shoes. And that was when we got the gift of Jamaican independence, not with the flying of the flag.
The social reforms of the 1970s in giving the Jamaican a sense of his own worth and dignity were huge. Much of that legislation was in the most advanced in the world of its time.
Camanus Estate, where the lands as far as the eye could see, was owned by a single white family. Such privilege was commonplace. Manley wanted radical social reforms to favour the poor. Members of his own class were nervous.
For the other Jamaica, the Jamaica of the wealthy and of the upper middle classes and the rich, things were quite all right, thank you. They'd done very well in the 1960s. You know, in the sort of last hurrah of the post-war economic boom. And why should it change?
A country like Jamaica cannot become a just society if you don't redistribute some of the wealth and some of the benefits. And we have begun that process of redistribution.
That was one of the things we disagreed on because for that.
Had always been his hero, so in a way it was.
Kissinger was staying just outside of Ocherius, and he asked Michael to come down and see him. And Michael talked to me about that, and I said, but I don't understand why you're Prime Minister. Why are you going down there to see him? And he said, because he asked me to come down and see him. I said, you're a Prime Minister. He comes to see you at Jamaica House. And then Kissinger came in and saw him at Jamaica House.
Kissinger asked Manley to condemn Castro's decision to send troops into Angola to fight South African-backed forces. Manley refused, showing solidarity with Castro and his utter contempt for apartheid.
Kissinger doesn't come down here and, you know, stick his finger in Manley's face. He box his finger out of your face. That is almost a national cultural reaction to it. I say give thanks to the fact that Manley stood up to Kissinger, despite everything else. Sometimes in history, you have to do that, and he did.
Now there are certain people in the world who say now Why are we taking this risk to anger the United States of America? And the answer is this: we are not angering the United States of America. They are angering themselves. They are not going to tell me what relationship I have with Fidel Castro. We have that friendship with Cuba as part of a world alliance of third world nations that are fighting for justice for poor people in the world. And I tell you as the party leader, as long as this party is in power, we intend to walk through the world on our feet and not on our knees.
We paid for it, we paid for it dearly in terms of aid. But Michael was very clear that, certain things you just had to take a stand on. Very firm on that.
At home, Manley's socialist dream had become a middle-class nightmare. If you don't like it, Manley told them, there are 5 flights a day to Miami. In the months that followed, thousands took his advice. Planes were packed with Jamaica's middle classes, taking their money with them.
When the first serious attempt at change was made, as always happens, there is a sort of almost like a shock wave that goes through the people who are better off and who have never really questioned the nature of the society under them. And so you did have a very real and regrettable reaction to some aspects of change.
Most of these were of the entrepreneurial class. So we had the horrendous picture of the country sliding into 8 years of negative growth, record high inflation, record high unemployment.
With the wealthy leaving in droves and US aid cut from $13 million to a mere $4, Manley was in deep trouble. What he saw was an American conspiracy to bring him down.
Let me tell you how destabilization works. They will go in, the secret group that is trying to mash up the country will go in among the youth and find one that look like a leader. And they call him one side and they say, hey brother, we drop you $1,000 on the side if you get the boys tomorrow night to go down across the road and carry out a raid. But him don't know that it is a destabilization agent that has paid somebody to come among him and sell the idea of starting a bit of a street fight.
Rumours were rife of covert US operations on the island, aiming to make the country impossible to run and dangerous to visit.
It would be known that some famous syndicated columnist of the United States was going to come to spend a week resting in some villa. And mysteriously, the first night he's there, gunmen would arrive and start firing guns round and round his villa. Nobody would be hurt. By the next morning, he's in a state of terror. He flies home, and 79 newspapers across America read the story of the violent, terrible society disintegrating with gunmen the next morning. So you get the next few thousand tourist cancellations.
Suddenly, guns were everywhere. Michael's allies saw this as proof of a CIA plot.
It was designed to remove the Manley government because he was too friendly with Cuba. We had to fight the good fight because that was what life was about, to resist these sort of overwhelming diktats as to how we should live.
On Edward Seaga's second visit to a polling booth in downtown Kingston, a gun battle broke out.
We actually had to fight a civil war to save our country at that time. The militancy that Manley brought through socialism made it now something that wasn't around the corner and behind the scenes, but right out in the open.
Whereas before there was coexistence, there was rivalry. I'm a JLP man, I'm a labor right. I'm a PNP man, I'm a comrade. And my party better than yours or whatever. But it didn't come to people killing each other. As it got hardened, it came to that.
The gangs of Tivoli and Trenchtown helped themselves to the imported weaponry. Rival politics had become sectarian, with daily battles between PNP and JLP supporters. Shootouts left hundreds dead and others caught in the crossfire.
We were actually pinned down in a particular area for 2.5 hours this morning, while nothing less than 2,000 rounds of ammunition were fired.
We cannot and will not stand by and allow this sabotage of our country to continue. The Cabinet has accordingly advised the Governor-General to act and proclaim a state of public emergency.
When they called the state of emergency, they locked up all the frontline leadership of the Jamaica Labour Party, the frontline workers. I was one of those who was locked up. I was detained for 7 months, kept in indefinite detention, no charge.
I'd move the world for Michael Manley, for the people's man. Yeah. Him see the people, him see the struggle of the people. Go off fight the last man, go off for the people all the way. Put on people, go off for the people all the way.
Michael had enough grassroots support to win the 1976 election, but the crisis still deepened. Foreign businesses found more friendly places to invest their money.
They frightened away every foreign investor that we had, and a lot of local investors at the same time, because they were threatened. They were told that they were not the sort of people that were not wanted here, that Jamaica was going to be a socialist country, and that the capitalist was no longer welcome. America was called a wicked imperialist capitalist nation, an exploiter, and the whole ambience of the place was very frightening to any kind of investment.
Of greater concern, the urban poor were losing patience. Michael Manley had no choice but to bow to US pressure as his socialist dream of a free, equal, independent Jamaica crumbled before his eyes. He went to the World Bank and effectively handed over the running of the country to the IMF. Jamaica's future would now be in the hands of foreigners.
He was, you know, sort of proud person who felt that although your country was small, that you had rights like everybody else. And I think he realized the extent to which these rights were going to be withdrawn.
Less than 20 years of independence had brought the island back to financial slavery. The IMF loan of $29 million was not enough and came with strings attached, which put an end to social reforms and led to shortages.
We can't get oil, we can't get detergent, we can't get flour, we can't get rice. Well, everything on a whole you can't get. Oh no, Mr. Iron, no.
For some crazy reason, I chose to have a baby in that 1980 election year. And he was premature. He was in the hospital for about 3 weeks in the intensive care unit at the hospital for premature babies. And I was able to interact with working class mothers on a day-to-day basis. They'd all come, we'd all come to visit the baby and our babies, and you know, we'd talk. And one of the things we talked about was the shortage of foodstuff.
I saw people who were willing to die just to free Jamaica at that time, because the people felt that they were in bondage. There are people who left Jamaica, who died abroad, very, very unhappy and very sad. There are people who still live abroad who swear they'd never come back to Jamaica because it was such a bad experience for them. It was the downfall. I'm telling you, it was a period where people hated him. They really hated him.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister, Edward Philip George Seaga,
800 people died in the run-up to the bloody 1980 election. Manley was on the ropes. In a bitter contest, he finally conceded to his rival, Edward Seaga.
Had he not conceded, Jamaica's future today would have been completely different. For one thing, the United States would have overtly entered Jamaica, I'm almost certain. We would have a completely different history. The fact that he conceded allowed him to come again to fight another day.
America breathed a sigh of relief as Edward Seaga put the ghost of socialism to rest.
There was just $11 million in the Bank of Jamaica when we took over. We wanted, first of all, to restore the bridges that had been burnt by Manley with our traditional partners.
For some people, it was like heaven on earth. Things had gone back to normal. All this talk about change and about blackness and about better and so on was eliminated, and we were back to the 60s where we should always have been. Money would flow from the United States, investment would flow, and life would be as it should be.
The US lavished over $200 million of aid on Seaga's government. With this new investment, business began to flourish.
In the 80s, the atmosphere was more pro-business, and consequently, you had a lot of remigration. People coming back home, business people, some professionals. But I think what is really important is that there's very, very much a good atmosphere of encouraging foreign investment. It's stable. The people that you can work with are available.
Butch Stewart became a successful entrepreneur in tourism, pioneering the Sandals Resort and later taking over the national airline. But his homegrown success was exceptional. Most of the new businesses which sprung up in Jamaica were owned by foreigners. Multinationals flooded in. Brands and chains began to dominate the place. The land of jerk chicken was sold the Kentucky dream.
Mr. Seaga was a fantastic salesman. He had the respect internationally. And so he was able to convince the private sector, both locally and overseas, to invest in Jamaica. He had programs, he had good policies.
On the same tarmac that Fidel had once embraced his comrade Michael Manley, Ronald Reagan heralded a new alliance between Jamaica and Washington.
The success of our venture depends on cooperation. And cooperation is easier between friends who share the same ideals.
The Reagan administration had an excellent relationship with Mr. Seaga, with Jamaica.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
It was a wonderful feeling because to me, it made the statement that yes, Jamaica had once again arrived. We had once again been accepted into the international arena. And we got a lot of assistance through that administration.
Despite generous aid, Seaga failed to grow the economy or develop new industry. In 1989, a reformed Michael Manley was returned to power. But now, his revolutionary zeal was gone.
I am a much wiser and more experienced man. So I don't know if that's new, but you know, we all have to grow, we all have to develop. I think I have.
The broad majority of people who voted for him expected that he would resume the policies of social reform which had begun in the 1970s and were sorely disappointed when they were very different.
Michael no longer had the stomach for the fight. His second coming lasted just 3 years. The 5-time married Michael faced a more personal battle that none of his turbulent years in power could prepare him for. he discovered he was dying of cancer.
He had this enormous fear of death. And I would say right up until his last breath, he would have done anything to live.
Michael Manley died aged 72 in March 1997. Thousands mourned the man they called Joshua.
The person who received the greatest, overwhelmingly greatest applause at the funeral was Fidel Castro. The slogan which one person uttered at the funeral, that Fidel is the only surviving Don, meaning Michael was a Don, that despite your complete dominance of the world, that there is somebody who can thumb their nose at you.
We were just so thrilled because we knew how much it would mean to Daddy and how right it was that he had stood by Fidel no matter the price he paid, and that in death Fidel had come to say goodbye. That meant a lot to us.
My Highland, don't sell out. Please don't sell out.
He was criticized a lot by his own social class who felt he had betrayed them, and he used to really take it to heart. I think when I look back on it, he just longed to be loved again by his own class, by, people he grew up with, his friends. He had the love of the masses. But I think he was always deeply hurt that his own social class couldn't see what it was he was trying to do.
After Michael died, Jamaica finally elected a leader that didn't come from the brown or mixed classes. Prime Minister P.J. Patterson represents a new strata of Jamaican society which is just finding its feet.
There's a new middle class in Jamaica, which is a direct product of this tremendous social movement which took place in the 1970s, which got opportunities because of Manley's regime, who came up through the ranks, who managed to get an education through the free education programs under Michael and university education too, and who took over.
The darker skinned Jamaican has become more confident and has become more domineering and will not put up with a lot of what would take place in the earlier days.
The experience of the Jamaican people has been exceptionally rich. Experience in terms of oppression, experience in terms of reform, experience in terms of culture, in sport, broadly, highly experienced people. And therefore, we are now on the verge of that experience being brought to bear on the direction of the country.
Jamaicans essentially are people who want their freedom, and they want to retain their freedom, and they will die fighting for their freedom.
From the university to the sports field, great men and women in arts, education and politics have their roots here. A small island of some 2.5 million people has made a big impact overseas. Like many with roots in Jamaica, I find myself wondering though, what would have happened if Manley's vision had succeeded? Would he have made Jamaica a beacon to other post-colonial societies and the envy of the Caribbean?
He would have had his touchstone of equality, and we would have had a just society where every man and woman had an equal opportunity and their vote, a roof over their head, fair wages. I think the sad thing is that they race so hard and they genuinely move mountains. And I honestly believe we almost made it.
From its Jamaican origins to its place in mainstream pop, BBC Two on the rise of reggae next. From ska to UK garage, BBCI has a new reggae website with a guide to the Jamaican fashions and dances at bbc.co.uk/reggae.